Pirates didn't use only cannons to kill their enemies. That's Hollywood nonsense. The real weapons they relied on were far more brutal and personal than you'd ever imagine. What made these tools so devastatingly effective against trained naval forces? When pirates needed to sink a ship or blow a hole in someone's day, cannons were their go-to solution. These metal monsters weren't exactly something you could pick up at your local weapon shop, though. Most pirates had to get creative, stealing them from captured vessels or buying them through shadier channels than a back alley poker game. Picture this, a 24-pound iron ball flying through the air at deadly speed. That's not just a number to impress your neighbors. We're talking about a chunk of metal that could punch through a ship's hull like it was made of cardboard. The destructive power was absolutely terrifying, and pirates knew it. But here's where things get interesting. Loading and firing these beasts wasn't a one-person job. It took an entire crew working together like a deadly orchestra. One guy would swab out the barrel, another would ram in the gunpowder, someone else would load the cannonball, and finally, the gunner would light the fuse. Miss a step? Well, let's just say pirates had a high turnover rate for cannon crews. The downside? These things were slower than a government response to crisis. Reloading took forever, and if you didn't maintain them properly, they had this nasty habit of exploding in your face. Nothing ruins your day quite like your own cannon deciding to become a grenade. Then there's the range issue. Most pirate ship cannons could reach about 1,500 yards on a good day. Sounds impressive until you realize that naval battles often required getting uncomfortably close to your enemy. This meant positioning and ship maneuvering became more important than having the biggest gun. Kind of like chess, but with significantly more explosions and screaming. Smart pirate captains mixed different sized cannons on their ships, smaller ones for quick shots, bigger ones for the knockout punch. It was all about balance. Too many large cannons and you'd run out of deck space faster than a buffet runs out of shrimp. The real genius was in how pirates used these weapons psychologically. The thunderous boom of a cannon wasn't just about destruction, it was about fear. Nothing made merchant sailors reconsider their career choices quite like hearing that distinctive roar echoing across the water. But cannons weren't the only weapons that struck terror into the hearts of sailors. Pirates had an entire arsenal of close-quarters combat tools that were even more personal, and arguably more vicious. If cannons were the heavy hitters, blunderbusses were like bringing a sawed-off shotgun to a knife fight. Except everyone had knives, and the fight was on a rocking boat. These wide-mouthed beasts weren't designed for precision. They were built for chaos. Picture a trumpet that shoots death instead of music. That's your blunderbuss right there. The barrel flared out like a funnel, and pirates would stuff it with whatever nasty bits they could find. Laid pellets? Sure. Broken glass? Why not? Rusty nails? Absolutely. One pirate reportedly loaded his with broken teeth from previous victims. Now that's what I call recycling with style. Loading these things was refreshingly simple compared to the cannon ballet we just discussed. Pour in some gunpowder, ram down your collection of sharp unpleasantries, point at whatever you want to stop existing, and pull the trigger. Takes about 30 seconds if you know what you're doing. Compare that to my grandfather trying to operate his smartphone. The blunderbuss wins every time. But here's where things get interesting. The effective range? Maybe 20 feet on a good day. Any farther and you might as well be throwing handfuls of gravel at a brick wall. This meant pirates had to get uncomfortably close to their targets, which explains why they needed those cutlasses we'll explore next. The spread pattern was absolutely brutal, though. One blast could take down 3 or 4 men standing together. It's like nature's way of encouraging people to social distance centuries before that became trendy. The sound alone was enough to make grown sailors reconsider their career choices. Smart pirates carried multiple blunderbusses because reloading during a fight was about as practical as doing taxes during a tornado. They'd fire one, toss it aside, grab another, and keep the mayhem flowing. Some captains wore them across their chests like a very aggressive fashion statement. The psychological impact was tremendous too. Nothing says surrender your cargo quite like staring down that gaping maw of a blunderbuss barrel. It looked hungry, and everyone knew what it was hungry for. These weapons were perfect for boarding actions where space was tight and targets were plenty. But they had one major weakness that would make even the bravest pirate think twice about relying on them completely. When the gunpowder ran out or got wet, you were left holding what amounted to an expensive club. Speaking of close-quarters combat, once those blunderbusses were empty, pirates needed something reliable for the intimate work of ship-to-ship fighting. The cutlass wasn't just any sword, it was basically the Swiss Army knife of pirate weaponry. If Swiss Army knives could slice through your enemies like a hot knife through butter. These beauties were typically around 2 to 3 feet long, curved just enough to maximize slashing power without looking like a scimitar from some Arabian tale. What made cutlasses absolutely perfect for pirates? Well, try swinging a massive longsword while balancing on a rocking ship deck during a storm. You'd probably end up cutting your own crew more than the enemy. The cutlass solved this problem brilliantly. Short enough to maneuver in tight spaces, light enough to wield with one hand, and curved just right to deliver devastating cuts that could slice through rope, canvas, or unfortunately, for their victims, flesh and bone. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't ceremonial pretty boy weapons. Pirates often started with whatever blade they could steal, then modified it for their specific needs. Some filed down the tips to prevent getting stuck in wooden ship holes during combat. Others wrapped the hilts with leather or rope for better grip when things got bloody. And trust me, things always got bloody. The really clever part? Cutlasses doubled as everyday tools. Need to cut rope quickly during a storm? Cutlass. Want to open a coconut on some tropical beach? Cutlass. Trying to intimidate a merchant captain into surrendering his cargo without a fight? Nothing says hand over the gold quite like a well-maintained cutlass gleaming in the Caribbean sun. Now, these weapons had their limitations. Against someone with a rapier or longer sword, you'd better be quick on your feet. The cutlass demanded you get up close and personal with your opponent. No graceful fencing from a safe distance. This created a particular type of pirate fighter, aggressive, fearless, and absolutely comfortable getting within arm's reach of death. The design was so practical that navies around the world adopted variations of the cutlass for their own sailors. When your enemy starts copying your homework, you know you've got something good going. Then there's the psychological factor nobody talks about. The distinctive whooshing sound of a cutlass cutting through air became synonymous with pirate attacks. Merchants would hear that sound and know exactly what they were dealing with. Speaking of sounds that struck fear into merchant hearts, let's talk about the tools that help pirates get close enough to use those cutlasses in the first place. When pirates spotted a juicy target on the horizon, cannons and guns were just the opening act. The real money shot? Getting close enough to actually board that ship and take everything worth stealing. Enter the grappling hook, basically a medieval Batman gadget, but with significantly more bloodshed involved. These iron claws attached to thick ropes weren't exactly subtle. Pirates would hurl them across the water gap between ships, hoping to snag rigging, railings, or anything solid enough to pull the vessels together. Think of it like the world's most dangerous fishing expedition, except instead of catching trout, you're reeling in a ship full of terrified merchants. But here's where things got tricky. Throwing a grappling hook accurately while both ships are rocking in ocean swells? That takes serious skill. Miss your target, and you've just wasted precious seconds while the enemy ship tries to escape. Worse yet, a poorly aimed hook might catch your own rigging and turn your grand assault into a slapstick comedy routine. Once those hooks bit deep and the ships were locked together, out came the boarding axes. These weren't your grandfather's wood-chopping tools from the shed. Boarding axes were brutal, practical weapons designed for one simple job: getting pirates from point A to point B as violently as possible. The typical boarding axe featured a sharp blade on one side for combat and a spike or hook on the other for grabbing onto ropes and enemy weapons. Pirates used them to hack through defensive barriers, chop rigging that might separate the ships, and of course, intimidate anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. What made boarding axes particularly nasty was their versatility. Need to cut through a rope holding up a sail? Done. Enemy sailor swinging a cutlass at your head? The axe handle made an excellent defensive weapon. Door locked on the captain's cabin where all the gold was hidden. Problem solved with a few well-placed chops. The whole boarding process required split-second timing and nerves of steel. Pirates had to coordinate their grappling, secure multiple connection points between ships, and then swarm across while defending against whatever weapons the other crew was frantically swinging at them. Well, speaking of weapons, the enemy might be swinging back. Pirates needed something to deal with those pesky defenders who refused to surrender their cargo peacefully. Swivel guns were like having a personal bodyguard with anger management issues. These compact artillery pieces sat mounted on ship railings, ready to spin around and blast anyone who dared get too close. Well, they weren't exactly compact by today's standards, but compared to those massive cannons we just talked about, they were practically pocket-sized. The genius of swivel guns lay in their 360-degree rotation. Makes sense, right? While regular cannons were stuck pointing in one direction like a stubborn mule, swivel guns could pivot faster than a politician during election season. Pirates could swing them around to face boarding parties, rake enemy decks with grape shot, or even fire down into smaller boats trying to escape. But here's where things get interesting. These weapons required a different kind of skill altogether. Unlike cannons that needed entire crews, one experienced pirate could operate a swivel gun. They'd aim by hand, adjusting for the ship's movement and the target's position. Think of it as the difference between driving an 18-wheeler and a sports car. Both dangerous, but one gives you way more control. The downside? Well, swivel guns fired much smaller projectiles than their big brothers. A typical swivel gun might launch a 1 or 2 pound shot, which sounds impressive until you remember those ship cannons we discussed earlier were hurling 24-pound iron balls. Against heavily armored vessels, swivel guns were like bringing a baseball bat to a demolition derby. And the weird part is, pirates often loaded these things with whatever metal scraps they could find. Nails, broken tools, pieces of chain, anything that would spray across an enemy deck and cause maximum chaos. The sound alone was enough to make seasoned sailors think twice about boarding. Then, there's the tactical brilliance of placement. Smart pirate captains positioned multiple swivel guns around their ship's perimeter, creating overlapping fields of fire. Anyone trying to climb aboard would face a gauntlet of spinning death from multiple angles. It was like having a very violent sprinkler system. These weapons also doubled as excellent crowd control during port visits. Nothing says respect my authority quite like a loaded swivel gun pointed at the dock. Pirates use this psychological advantage during negotiations, proving that sometimes the threat of violence works better than violence itself. But even the mighty swivel gun had its limitations when facing certain weapons that could strike from much greater distances. Talk about unconventional warfare. While most people think pirates relied solely on cannons and cutlasses, the craftiest captains knew that sometimes the nose defeats the sword. Stink pots and smoke bombs were basically the ancient equivalent of a really bad day at a sewage treatment plant, except weaponized. These clay pots packed more punch than your uncle's famous chili recipe. Pirates would stuff them with the most putrid concoctions imaginable. Rotten fish, sulfur, human waste, tar, and anything else that could make grown sailors question their life choices. The smell alone could clear a deck faster than news of unpaid taxes. But here's where it gets interesting. Launching these beauties required perfect timing and a strong stomach. One wrong wind direction, your own crew ends up gagging while the enemy laughs their way to victory. I've read accounts of pirate crews accidentally gassing themselves. Talk about friendly fire taking on a whole new meaning. The psychological impact was brutal. Nothing ruins a sailor's fighting spirit quite like breathing air that smells like death warmed over. Enemy crews would abandon their posts, covering their faces and stumbling around like they'd been hit with medieval tear gas, which, essentially, they had. Then there were the smoke bombs, equally devious but with a different strategy. These created thick, choking clouds that turned organized naval battles into complete chaos. Pirates could disappear in the smoke, reposition their ships, or launch surprise boarding attacks while enemies fumbled around blind. The beauty of stink pots lay in their simplicity. Any crew member could make them using readily available materials. No fancy gunpowder needed, no expensive metal components, just creativity and a strong stomach for handling the ingredients. Makes you appreciate modern weapons manufacturing, doesn't it? Smart pirates carried multiple varieties, some for maximum stench, others for dense smoke coverage. The most cunning captains would even create decoy pots filled with harmless but dramatic-looking substances to confuse enemies about their real intentions. Well, the effectiveness varied wildly. Weather conditions, wind patterns, and pure luck all played massive roles. But when they worked, absolute game changers. These weapons proved that pirates weren't just mindless brutes swinging swords. They were tactical innovators willing to fight dirty. Speaking of fighting dirty, wait until you hear about the weapon that could punch holes in ship hulls like a giant's fist through paper. If cannons were the heavyweight boxers of pirate warfare, then carronades were the street fighters who knew exactly where to throw their punches. These stubby little monsters earned the nickname Smashers for good reason. They could punch holes in ship hulls so big you could practically drive a horse and buggy through them. Picture your grandfather's favorite recliner compared to a rigid church pew. That's the difference between a carronade and a regular cannon. Shorter, lighter, and about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the kneecaps. While traditional cannons focused on range and precision, carronades said, forget all that fancy stuff, and went straight for maximum destruction at close quarters. Here's where it gets interesting, though. These weapons didn't show up until the late 1700s, making them the new kids on the block in pirate armories. But boy, did they make an entrance. Pirates who managed to get their hands on carronades suddenly found themselves with a serious advantage over ships still relying on older artillery. The genius of the carronade lay in its simplicity. Less gunpowder, shorter barrel, but absolutely devastating results when you got close enough. Think of it like the difference between a sniper rifle and a baseball bat. Both can get the job done, but one requires you to get up close and personal. Pirates loved these things because they could disable enemy ships without sending them straight to Davy Jones's locker. After all, what good is treasure at the bottom of the ocean? The carronade could blast away a ship's ability to fight back while keeping the valuable cargo nice and dry. But here's the catch. And there's always a catch with pirate weapons. Carronades were about as useful as a chocolate teapot at long range. Miss your chance to get close, and you might as well be throwing angry words at your enemy. Plus, reloading took forever, which meant you better make that first shot count. The real beauty was how these weapons leveled the playing field. Suddenly, smaller pirate ships could take on massive merchant vessels and military frigates. It was like giving David a rocket launcher instead of a slingshot. Well, speaking of weapons that required getting dangerously close to your enemy, nothing epitomized the personal nature of pirate combat quite like the weapons they carried in their own hands. When most people think of pirate weapons, they picture some crusty old captain waving around a flintlock pistol like Blackbeard himself. Well, they're not wrong about the popularity part. These single-shot wonders were basically the iPhone of pirate weaponry. Everyone had to have one. Unlike those massive cannons that required a whole crew to operate, flintlock pistols were refreshingly simple. Point, shoot, pray it actually worked. Makes sense, right? But here's where things get interesting. Pirates didn't just carry one pistol. They'd often strap on 4 or 5 of these things like some kind of 18th century action hero. Why? Because after you fired your shot, you had about as much chance of reloading quickly as a turtle has of winning a marathon. The mechanics were surprisingly clever for their time. A piece of flint struck steel, creating sparks that ignited gunpowder in a small pan, which then set off the main charge. It was like a Rube Goldberg machine designed by someone who really wanted to shoot people. The whole process took maybe 3 seconds when everything worked perfectly. Which, let's be honest, wasn't always the case. Rain was these pistols' kryptonite. Get the powder wet, and you're basically holding an expensive club. Pirates learned to keep their powder dry the hard way, often discovering mid-battle that their fearsome weapon had turned into a decorative paperweight. Then there's the accuracy issue. Hitting anything beyond 20 feet was more luck than skill. The smooth bore barrel meant the ball could go anywhere within a general cone-shaped area. It's like playing darts while riding a bucking horse in a hurricane. But pirates weren't exactly marksmen anyway. They preferred the up-close and personal approach to conflict resolution. A flintlock pistol was perfect for those heated moments when you needed to make a point quickly and dramatically. The psychological impact was huge, too. The flash, the bang, the smoke, it was theater and violence rolled into one. Even if you missed your target, you'd probably scare the living daylights out of everyone nearby. Many captains treated their pistols like jewelry, decorating them with silver inlays and fancy engravings, because nothing says professional pirate quite like a beautifully crafted instrument of mayhem tucked into your belt. And the weird part is, despite all their limitations, these pistols shaped pirate culture more than almost any other weapon. They represented personal power in an age when most fights were still settled with swords.